Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, Surviving a Pandemic Year, a local's look at Churchill, presented by Nat Hab Expedition Leaders, Eleanor, Edye, and Judy Wilson. It's a pleasure to have you both with us today. Judy, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Kendall, and welcome everyone. It's great to kind of not see you, but know you're there. Eleanor and I are very happy to be here today. We are both coming to you from sunny Manitoba up in Canada, and we both spent a fair bit of time in Churchill in 2020, and we wanted to share some of the info and updates of what things have been like there in the last 12 months, as Churchill is near and dear to our hearts and many of you who are listening to this today as well. As was the case globally, the ability for people to travel and move freely across borders kind of changed this time last year quite quickly, and we just wanted to sort of do a little bit of an update. Okay, so let's introduce ourselves and get started. Okay, Eleanor. I'm the one on the left there. I'm Judy Wilson. I've been an expedition leader for Nat Hab since 2018, and I guide in all three of the Nat Hab seasons up in Churchill. So that's Northern Lights and Arctic exploration in February, March, and belugas, bears, and summer wildlife of Churchill in July and August, and of course polar bear season in October and November. Last year, which really seems like a lifetime ago, I was thrilled and so honored to be able to lead one of the first women-only Churchill trips, which was a Northern Lights experience. So I would highly recommend, if that kind of resonates with you, just do it. It was a lot of fun. And this fall, Eleanor and I will be leading a new Nat Hab trip called Whales and Nature Trails of Quebec. And we're very excited, and we can't wait to spend more time with the whales and show you all the fall colors. So I was raised and I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I'm a proud Manitoban. And I've been hanging around Churchill for the last 7 years in the various seasons. After my very first trip there, I begged the board of the Churchill Northern Studies Center to let me be on the board. And I've been on there ever since. I'm on the executive now, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But let's just say that due to COVID, I've spent a lot of time there doing whatever I can for it and at the center.
All right, thanks, Judy. So I'll give myself a little introduction as well. I love looking at this photo of us, Judy, because it brings me back to all the times we have spent together. I think Judy and I have been paired up we've been paired up a lot. And so being able to have a chance to talk with Judy to all of you today just feels like we're coming back to this wonderful time. So my name is Eleanor Edye. I have been an expedition leader with Natural Habitat since 2016, and also have been based mainly out of our Churchill program. So the belugas, the polar bears, and the Northern Lights. Same as Judy, and very much looking forward to the new programs coming up. Similar to Judy, I got drafted into working at the Churchill Northern Studies Center, which is an independent not-for-profit research center located just outside Churchill. I know a lot of the visitors who have come up with our programs at Churchill have already been there and have seen it. And it has maintained some research presence in Churchill throughout the pandemic. So we want to give information on what's been happening up there right now, as well as kind of what it has looked like for both tourism and research over the last year. Like Judy, I'm based in Manitoba, spent a lot of time in Churchill. I've honestly been working up there on and off for approaching the end of my second decade there now, which is a little bit crazy, but just have been so incredibly grateful to still get to spend time in Churchill, even during this time of lockdown. So just to take you through what we're planning on talking about today, like I said, we'll be touching on a lot of where Churchill is, why do we go there, what is so fantastic about it, as well as some of the basic biology and science behind our trips that we run. So science behind the beluga whales and the polar bears, the natural history of those. But I do want to preface that by saying that we have had a lot of daily dose of nature webinars, and even most recently, Edye Savage was on last week talking about beluga whales, and he did an absolutely amazing job. And if you want any more information about the natural history of these animals, it's been covered and it's been done really, really well. What we want to bring into this is looking at how this has happened in the past 12 months or so. So we're going to start off by locating Churchill for you on a map. And I have up here a map of North America with a great big yellow arrow pointing at Churchill for you. So Churchill is a small town of 800 to 900 people, depending when you catch it, on the western shores of Hudson Bay. It is, of course, in the province of Manitoba in Canada. It is located at 58.8 degrees north, so below the Arctic Circle, but it is located at what we call an ecological transitional zone. So in Churchill and around Churchill, we move very rapidly between a lot of different ecological regions. To the south, we have the boreal forest, and to the north, we have the Arctic tundra. And in between, we have this very abrupt transitional zone. We also have the transition here between the marine environment of Hudson Bay, which is a saltwater bay of the Arctic Ocean, and the land environment. And on top of that, we have the fact that the land close to Churchill is located within the world's second largest wetland, and a full half of the land that you're on is actually freshwater. So we have all these different pockets of ecological regions that Churchill straddles, and by going to Churchill, it gives us the chance to see animals from all of those different regions, as well as the plants. So it's a really, really phenomenal place to go and see a lot of things in a very small area. And there's not a whole lot of places you can go to in the world where you can take, a few big steps and move from the tundra into the forest. It is a very, very sharp transition around Churchill. We have reasons that we go there as expedition leaders and with you for natural habitat. So the seasons that natural habitat focuses on are, of course, the big three. We have our polar bear season in the fall. So typically in October and November is when we go up to see polar bears. We have the beluga whale season when the water is open, usually in July and August. And then we also have our northern light season. And for this, we run trips usually January, February, March. But Churchill is a fairly unique place in that we actually get aurora activity about 300 nights out of the year in Churchill. It's just that we go up there in the winter because we have those long, dark, clear nights that we have a better chance of seeing them. These are, of course, just the highlights of why we go to Churchill. There's lots of other things as well. There's cultural history, there's other natural history, there's birding, there's geology. But these are the real big three that bring us in pretty consistently. And I'm going to kick us off by talking about the seasonal residents, the beluga whales. And again, this is meant to be a fairly short introduction to the beluga whales. And then Judy's going to talk about what her experience was like actually being up in Churchill in this past summer. So the beluga whales, not to be biased, but they are my favorite animal of the Churchill region. They are gregarious. They are interested in what's going on. They're incredibly vocal. And it's, I was so sad last year to not have a chance to see them because I did not get the chance to travel up during the summer. In the summertime, so during the ice-free season, we have around 3,500 beluga whales that move into the Churchill River estuary. So it is a migratory population. And they are an Arctic adapted whale. They have a number of specialized adaptations that make them able to survive and thrive within this Arctic environment. So they are a species of ice-covered regions. Seems funny because they're air breathers, right? They're not fish. They have to have air access to be able to survive. But what they do have is if you look at the right-hand side picture here, instead of a dorsal fin, they have a dorsal ridge. And this ridge is quite hard and can actually be pushed up through ice up to about 8 inches thick to break through and give them access to the air. They are also, they have unfused neck vertebrae. So unlike other whales that have to turn their whole body to move around, they're able to turn their head like this one in the left-hand picture is doing and look at you or move around or do a flip underwater or whatever else they need to do for that greater maneuverability within those ice-covered regions. They're also incredibly fatty. They're about 50% body fat by weight. And that weight overall is about 3,500 pounds for a large male, about 18 feet long. And the females are a little bit smaller. They run around 80% of the size of the males overall. So what brings them to Churchill? Because we know that they do well in ice. So why do they come south for the summer? Well, this next slide that we're going to look at here is the migration route of the beluga whales of the Hudson Bay region. So we have at Natural Habitat tours that are in Africa looking at the Great Migration along the Serengeti. And we know of these great migrations around the world, but I personally believe that this is the greatest migration that you probably haven't heard of yet. We have about 60,000 beluga whales in the Hudson Bay region, and they all winter up in the northern part, the Hudson Strait. So between Baffin Island there and the coast that's just below that, so the northern tip of Quebec, that is the wintering region of those whales. And they stay there because the ice, it's an ice-free area. They can get consistent access to air. But come the summer, as soon as that ice starts to break up, they are going to travel down along the coast of Hudson Bay into those regions indicated in the black along the bottom left corner of the bay there. So those regions in black are their summering areas, and they're less present in the bay itself. They're mostly going for those various river estuaries. So the Churchill River estuary, like I said, gets around 3,500 whales in the summer. The Steel River estuary, the Nelson River estuary, they also get beluga whale populations that come in throughout the summer as well. So why do that? Why swim all that way? Well, they're there for a number of reasons. They come because they are following their food. So the food source, the main food source of the Western Hudson Bay population of beluga whales is a small fish, about sardine size, called a capelin, and they will also move into those river estuaries in the summer. They also travel into the river estuaries to get that warmer, shallower water for calving. And this is where those female beluga whales who have been pregnant will come in and give birth. So the picture that you're looking at right now is an example of the aggregation, the type of aggregation that we can see within the Churchill River estuary. This is certainly an extreme example. I picked this picture because it's a great visual of what you can see when you go into the river estuary. You can turn your head and it can just be beluga whales all around you. These particular whales have come fairly far up into the river. These are family groupings. So we're looking at the mature whales here are the very bright white ones. They are moving up into the river to give birth to their calves. And our next slide that we're going to look at is one of those calves, which I think is about the most adorable thing you can see. I know polar bear cubs are also cute, but I don't think anything holds a candle to a newborn beluga whale. And this is what you're looking at here. It's the mum behind and a brand spanking new newborn beluga whale riding on her side flipper. So unlike a lot of other whales that come up often and turn their head and spy hop, beluga whales mostly maintain a fairly low profile in the water. When they come up to breathe, you just see the blowhole rolling over. The exception to this is those newborns because they still sit quite high in the water and they're riding on their mom's flippers. These are the faces that you get to see as you're around in July and August meeting these whales. So the next thing I'm going to pull up, I'm not going to talk over this. It's a short video clip of what some of our viewing activities look like in the summer. So we go out in Zodiac boats or in kayaks to view these whales. And I'm going to push play on this right away so you can get a sense of how these belugas move around the boats and what the viewing is like when you're out there and looking. So they often come right up to the boat like this. You can see the dorsal ridge on them as they come up. And often at this time, also being very vocal, blowing bubbles, blowing water at you. I've come off these boats pretty soaking wet at some point when a whale has decided to blow water right at me. So that's a really quick look at what some of those viewing activities can look like. With that, I'm going to hand over the rest of this discussion about beluga whales to Judy, who I am incredibly jealous of, who got to spend a lot of the summer of 2020 actually with the whales.
Thank you, Eleanor. That was a great video. Yeah, I was really fortunate to be able to get out on the water with the belugas numerous times in zodiacs as well as in kayaks. And just as a point of interest, on Nat Hab summer trips, we take our guests out on both zodiacs and kayaks. So this is sort of indicative of what you would be doing and seeing when you're out there with us. We had to wear masks, obviously following protocol. Or heavy buffs on the Zodiac, but it was surprisingly comfortable. It wasn't really, I didn't really notice it. Yeah, it was quite comfortable. And all the tours that I was on, all the tours that were run, had to be run at half capacity to be as safe as possible and to follow COVID restrictions and stuff. And family groups would sit together. And, the funny thing for me is, again, on Nat Hab trips, those zodiacs are all only half capacity anyway, so it really didn't feel different at all. That's what we're used to with Nat Hab, because that gives you the best viewing experience possible. So that felt very similar. And when you're in a kayak, you're on your own, so that's not really an issue there unless you're in a double. So Churchill's been very safe during the pandemic, and protocols have basically worked. So we're just going to go to the next one here. So speaking of kayaks, this is really the epitome of being socially distant. Felt really safe when I was out there. That's me in the back in the dark red paddling jacket. So why was I here in the summer anyway? What allowed that, and why was I there? So as I mentioned, I'm on the board at the Churchill Northern Studies Center. So it's a subarctic research and education facility, and it's just east of Churchill, as Eleanor mentioned. The center had to close to the majority of outside research activity this spring, which was a real blow to the researchers from across North America. So in August, there was an opportunity for myself and the board chair, who's a wildlife biologist, to take up a very small group of Manitoba researchers and grad students. And the goal was to do as much fieldwork and data collection as possible with as few people as possible. So in the 3 weeks that I was there in August, I assisted with data collection on a number of different projects. So I'd like to give you just a little bit of a snapshot of some of that research. This image here was taken, it's my favorite image of myself, and you can't even tell, you can't even see me. But this image was taken from up in the gallery, way up at the top of the port of Churchill. And that image was taken as a part of a University of Manitoba beluga research project. But in this picture, we are working on a different beluga project where we're doing things from kayaks. We're doing beluga behavioral research data collection, and it's in the Churchill River. And we're monitoring the belugas as they're going about doing their daily activities, such as traveling and feeding and milling around and socializing and resting, and interacting with any of the vessels that they encounter in the estuary. So even though there were fewer tourism boats than normal, we were taking notes of that. So we also noted the types of individuals in each group. So that would include everything from calves to juveniles, adults, and the mixed groups. And in this next slide, it just sort of shows it just like a little bit of the safety. Everyone was being compliant with regulations, and the one gal on the left with the pencil in her hand, she's from the Assiniboine Zoo in Winnipeg and was up doing other research projects, but everyone that was at the study center, regardless of what they were doing, pitched in to help whenever possible. And I don't want to lie that the option of going on a Zodiac and watching belugas wasn't a hard sell. So yeah. And in this next research project that I was helping out with, that's Stefan Peterson on the left. He's the head of research and conservation at the Assiniboine Park Zoo in Winnipeg, and that's his master's student on the right. They're studying the diet and movement behavior of harbor seals in the Churchill River and also in the estuary area. Previous research that they had done indicated that harbor seals are becoming more numerous in population. So they're trying to determine what's the potential impact on this change in population on the ecosystem. So we were gathering, or they were gathering, samples of fish, jellyfish, seaweed, anything that the harbor seals eat or would potentially eat. So they were taking samples throughout the river and the estuary to match what is found in the liver and the muscle of the seals. So here they're setting nets to collect fish, and Julian's got the handheld probe, and that monitors dissolved oxygen, salt concentration, and things like water, that sort of thing, and water temperature. I was alternating between helping take out and put nets in, and also I was sometimes I was watching for bears as the bear monitor. So if any of you want to head down a little rabbit hole after the presentation, not right now, just Google the words beluga bits. It's a citizen science project that all of you can help out on, that Stefan, it's his brainchild and his baby. So he enlists your help in examining underwater photos of belugas to help identify their age, sex, and group size. And they're also looking for identifying marks to recognize beluga that may return to the estuary in subsequent years. And this last year was very exciting. They did actually identify one that had been there a number of years previous. We're going to go to the next one. This next image to me says so much about life on the tundra. And I know you might be going, what? But that is from the air. That's an Arctic fox den. And Dr. Jim Roth is a wildlife biologist at the University of Manitoba. And he's been studying Arctic foxes and their dens since 1994. And he has mapped out 120 fox dens on the tundra, across the tundra, and into the boreal forest, mostly on the tundra though. These dens are hundreds of years old, and they do persist for approximately 300 years, they figure, is how long they can be used. The Arctic fox initially built these dens up on higher beach ridges on the tundra, where there's more permafrost, or the permafrost is deeper, sorry. So the drainage is better, so there's no flooding in the dens. And then when they built these things, all of a sudden the most amazing things start to happen. And these Arctic foxes are like ecosystem engineers. Just by doing their foxy thing, raising pups in the summer in these dens, pooping and peeing, and dragging prey onto these dens to eat, geese and lemmings and whatever, all of a sudden it's become a very nutrient-rich hotspot of biodiversity, as Jim likes to say. So this has triggered all this vegetative growth, and you can see these lush green dens easily from the air, from miles away. They attract other herbivores such as lemmings, which also happens to be the #1 food, or one of the food sources for Arctic fox, birds, caribou, herbivores. So it's become this real oasis. And one of the things that they're finding out through their research is the lemming populations are very cyclical, we knew that, but the numbers have been down for quite a while, and they're staying down. They haven't rebounded, which is really being tough on the predators such as the Arctic fox. And the fear is that climate change is impacting them. There used to be 30 lemmings per hectare, and they are now down to populations of 2, and in some cases 0 per hectare. So it's really quite a drastic fall. So these lemming populations being low are going to impact the Arctic fox. So couple that with a longer ice-free season, and numbers are down indeed of the Arctic fox. And the majority of these dens are in and around the Wapusk National Park area to the east of Churchill. It is a national park, and there's a lot of rules about doing research there. So Jim and his team are allowed to go there 3 times a year to assess reproductive success. And in August, they do helicopter flyovers of the dens. So again, I was one of the few people available. So I was lucky enough to be able to spend a day in a helicopter, which is like heaven. And we were looking for evidence of burrowing and prey remains on the dens. So you basically do a flyby, kind of go around it once, make sure we've got all the information we need. And if we have to do it again, we go around again and then on to the next den on the map. It was really hard to focus on what I was supposed to be doing, because at one point we saw a family of Arctic foxes all running around. And then it was like being in a nature documentary, and I've got sandhill cranes flying below the helicopter, and tundra swans and bald eagles and caribou. It was just insane. Anyway, needless to say, it was a rough day at the office. This is some couple of the fox dens that are in Wapusk. And on the left is a red fox, and on the right is a wolf. And these dens attract an amazing array of predators and prey. And these game cameras, which many of us are familiar with, have now become a really useful tool to do research on the tundra. So it's now become common, thanks to these game cameras, to see red fox utilizing the dens. And they would certainly kill an Arctic fox if they had the chance, but they may just be using the den themselves. We've seen polar bear and caribou in some of the pictures, and you've got the wolf on the right. The wolves, that family was there for a couple of weeks and then they disappeared. Red fox populations, thanks to a warming climate, have started to encroach on the southern end of the Arctic fox territory, or habitat. So now what's happening is we are getting these red foxes who are competing and in some cases killing Arctic fox. We know that they've killed some of them. Scientists used to think they were actually really displacing them. And now what they're wondering about, Jim and his team, they're wondering if really the Arctic fox populations are just low enough that the red fox are just saying, oh, okay, here's a few extra dens, and they're moving into the dens. So in our Nat Hab trips that we do in Churchill, in summer and in polar bear season, there is a den that's on our route when we're out on the rovers, and we'll stop at the den, and the odd time that den is actually in use and it's active, so that's really cool. And when it's not active, you can still see the remains of the prey, the bones, the skulls and stuff like that have been left from the last families that were there in the dens. And it wouldn't be a Churchill talk without mentioning the Northern Lights. We're in March right now. February and March is our traditional Nat Hab Northern Light time for our trips. But as Eleanor said, there's opportunity to view Northern Lights throughout the year. And it's never a guarantee in summer or in bear season, but I just want to reassure you that as expedition leaders, we are constantly checking the data and on the lookout for Northern Lights, because they are just so mystical and such a phenomenal experience for people to have up in Churchill. It's like nothing you've seen down south, if you even have seen Northern Lights down south. So we will get you out to see them if they're out. And this all started off back with belugas and being in the zodiacs and having fun with belugas. And here we are with a polar bear in behind the zodiac. And if you're lucky enough, you may actually see a bear swimming when you're in Churchill with us on trip. But this is a bit close, I must say. Bears are never guaranteed in summer, but they do make their way, obviously, to what we've talked about that, said that, and we will be talking about it, but they make their way to land after the ice is melted and sea ice breaks up. And sometimes that overlaps with when belugas are in Churchill and tours are going, and they may have been sitting on that last little hunk of ice, and Eleanor is going to talk about that later. Or they may just be trying to cool off. And often on our summer Nat Hab trips, we will see bears on land from the zodiac. So it's kind of cool. It's like who's in the zoo, but whatever. It is really exciting to see them from the water when they're just doing their thing up on the rocks. Speaking of bears, we did promise that we were going to be talking about polar bears, and I'm going to get into a little bit of the science or the biology in that of polar bears, and then Eleanor is going to have some interesting stories from her time there. But polar bears, their scientific name, Ursus maritimus, really explains perfectly what they are. The sea or maritime bear, they spend as much of their life as possible on sea ice, hunting, resting, mating, just traveling around. And then the rest of the time, they are literally just waiting for ice. So this next one is couple of mom and a couple of two of her cubs in August of last year were just trying to stay cool. They were trying not to overheat and just doing as little as possible. And these three bears are part of the Western Hudson Bay subpopulation, which is the one that those are the bears that we see in Churchill, all from that population. There are 19 subpopulations around the world, with the majority of these units partially or entirely within Canada. So there's tremendous fidelity with these bears to the Churchill area. So even out on the ice, if they're mixing with bears from a couple of the other populations, they will come back to their home territory of Churchill. And it's estimated, and it's a very rough estimate, there are roughly 842 in the Western Hudson Bay population, but this has decreased from about 1987, they estimated about 1,200 bears. So that's not really great news. And worldwide, there are approximately 25,000 polar bears. Yeah, so this was a very warm day, and we're gonna take a little look at why the polar bears are here on this next slide. So as Eleanor mentioned, there have been some great daily dose of nature webinars done by many of our esteemed Nat Hab colleagues over the last number of months, covering everything from belugas to bears to just some general Churchill trip information. They're very, very informative. So yeah, check those out in the archives. But it does help to give a high-level overview of why bears are in the Churchill area. So we like to use a map of the Hudson Bay watershed to show the size of it and also show the currents that are in the bay. So this Hudson Bay watershed is the largest watershed in Canada. It encompasses 3.8 million kilometers squared, and it spans over five of our provinces, the 2 territories, and there's a ton of major river systems that are dumping water into the Hudson Bay. And in Manitoba there, we've got Lake Manitoba and Lake Winnipeg. They're very large, and they're also part of the watershed. So once that water starts to come into Hudson Bay, it's a tremendous amount of fresh water. So if we look at the Churchill River as an example, on the right-hand slide, there's that red dot. Just above there, the Churchill River is going to empty into Hudson Bay. So fresh water in these rivers freezes first before the salty water of Hudson Bay. So chunks of ice are going to slosh around. They're going to get frozen, and they're going to slosh around in the river. And with the tides, they're going to move out into the bay. And when they move into the bay, they get caught in this countercurrent, counterclockwise, and I think my fingers are going the wrong way here, but on the counterclockwise direction. And they get hung up on there's a shelf of land at Cape Churchill there where that red dot is. And the chunks of ice get bunged up in there, and they just build up, and eventually they're large enough and supportive enough to support seals. They'll haul out on there. And the ring seals being the preferred choice food for a polar bear, the bears know that the ice forms there, and that's where the seals are. So that's where they're going to be accessing that platform. And so the bears are congregated basically along the coast. So when we talk about bears congregating and getting to the coast, that red dot is sort of one of the really big areas, and it's just down a wee bit from Churchill. So all along that coast, we'll get bears. So since the ice on the Hudson Bay is seasonal, the bears are forced onto land in the summer, sometime for varying amounts of time. But what's happened in the last number of decades is that the ice is breaking up 3 weeks earlier than it was, say, 30 years ago. So many bears have to contend with the possibility of coming off the ice in poorer condition than is ideal. So that means they've got lower fat reserves. It's the younger, sort of less experienced bears that would really suffer from this, and also mums and cubs who would really feel the effect of a shorter ice season at this point in time. This guy, however, is in really good shape. He obviously had a very successful season on the ice hunting ring seals. Just hanging out, standing there or lying down, he can lose 2 pounds a day in the summer just by fasting and not doing anything. On the ice, they can put on 4.5 pounds of fat per day. So that's quite a difference. So as the temperature drops in October and November, these bears are going to move closer to that shoreline and just wait for the ice to form. Go to the next one. Oops, there we go. How cute is that? So in the middle, we've got a mom and her 2 cubs. And the females are smaller than the males. They're usually in that 330 to 530 pound range, and they can double their weight by the time they're coming off the ice after having a good season on the ice hunting ring seals. And this mom could potentially live to about 25 years of age. The oldest in captivity was Debbie. She was 42, and I kind of grew up I took my kids to see Debbie. I saw Debbie. She was at the Assiniboine Park Zoo here in Winnipeg. So that was 42. This mom would have entered estrus around the age of 5 or 6. And in her lifetime, she may have 6 or 7 litters in total, depending on lost litters. And as the cubs stay with her for 2.5 years, they stayed with her 2.5 years into their second spring. And then when she goes back onto the ice in that year, she'll either boot them away to mate, or a male will end up chasing them away. So we'll just go to the next one. So these cubs are close to their second birthday. And this mom has on the previous picture, they were looking at a male that was approaching. And this picture, she's saying, no, we're not hanging around. So she is busy teaching them everything they need to know to be as safe as possible and to avoid the approaching males. And they've only got about 4 or 5 more months to hang out with mom before they're on their own. So in the meantime, she's going to do anything possible to protect them, because it is not uncommon for males to at times attack cubs. So speaking of males, in this next image, the males will have a shorter lifespan due to many of the battles that they'll end up having out on the ice in the competition for mates. So they live a little shorter life, maybe 20 to 25 years is pretty good for a male. They may break their canines. Broken canines are really tough on a bear because that's how they grab seals. That's a lot of their eating power. So that may cause an early demise. In captivity, however, Skipper, who was at the Assiniboine Park Zoo, he lived till he was 34. So males mature around the age of 6 years old, and in theory would be able to mate, but many of them don't mate until they're about 10 because there's just so much competition for females, and the big, strong males just dominate. They'll weigh in around 775 to 1,500 pounds by the time they're 8 to 10 years old. And the males are substantially larger than the females, approximately 30% more. So as freeze up approaches, the males get the best spots, and the pecking order kind of goes down from there. And the mums and cubs give these males, the big males, a wide berth, and they'll often just hang back inland until the males have moved out onto the ice and it's safe for them to take cubs out. So just a couple of Arctic adaptations, maybe just based on what you see in this image here. These guys are incredibly well adapted to life on the ice. They've got long guard hairs, about 6 inches long, short, dense underfur, 4.5 inches of fat, and those paws and those claws and legs, everything about them is designed for either for travel on the sea ice or swimming or catching seals. And those feet are about 12 inches across. So they've got like snowshoes and cleats and everything all in one. And their nose can smell a seal lair about 3 to 4 feet under the snow that's 100 meters away. And they can also smell another bear or even seals from at least 10 miles away, and research is showing it might even be further. So I am gonna now pass this over to me. I'm really missing polar bears now, aren't you, Eleanor? Oh man. I'm gonna pass it over to, yeah, right, you saw more than I did. I'm gonna pass it over to Eleanor because she had her family up in Churchill for the beginning of bear season, and she was there for the entire season. So I'm very jealous, but over to you, Eleanor.
Thanks, Judy. Thanks for setting us up so well talking about bears. And like Judy said, I had the opportunity to bring my family up to Churchill this past bear season. Normally, working as an expedition leader, we're pretty busy and don't really have the time to do any family trips. But this past year, I was hired on as the interim executive director at the research center up there, which left me with evenings and weekends to all of a sudden get to be a tourist again. So the theme of polar bear season in Churchill, just like the theme of October and November everywhere else in the world, was still a COVID safety theme. And the signs that you would have seen up around the town in Churchill are these ones here. So we do social distancing Arctic Canadian style by staying 1 polar bear apart. My recommendation is actually to stay many, many polar bears apart when it comes to actually how close you can get to a polar bear. But you have to bring some Canadian content in here somewhere. So the normal Churchill bear season, for those who have been up before, and I'm guessing a lot of the people who are on today have been, it runs in October and November. Churchill welcomes a lot of people who come up to specifically see the polar bears from places from around the world. This past October and November, Churchill was open for Western Canadians. Other people could come, but there was a mandatory quarantine involved. So what ended up happening is that instead of a regular 2-month bear season, we had this condensed 3 to 4 week season where people from Western Canada looked at their bucket list and said, oh, hey, I can actually do that this year, and ended up coming up with sometimes fairly short notice. And that was actually how it ended up going with my family. It wasn't a trip that we'd planned for years. It was very opportunistic, and we took the chance where it arose. So this picture on the left here is a picture my lovely husband took from the train. They did take the train to come up and meet me in Churchill. Nat Hab generally uses chartered flights from Winnipeg to come up to Churchill, and you'll understand why with my next sentence. The train, while beautiful, while taking you through the parkland and the boreal forest and the forest tundra, is a full 2-day trip in one direction from Winnipeg to get to Churchill. So if you want a long, slow ride across the landscape, the train is a great option. If you want to get up and see the bears very quickly, as most of us do, the flights are still running. So that left-hand side is just a great shot coming into the boreal forest there. And on the right, you see at least one happy child of mine. This is my youngest son, who was really happy to explore somewhere new after having been basically stuck at home for the 6 months prior. He is sitting on what is called an Inukshuk. Inukshuk are very much features of northern Canada. They are stone sculptures meant to look like people, usually. If you transliterate the name, it literally means to stand in the place of a man. And the one that you can see that he's sitting on is kind of vaguely man-shaped, and they were traditionally used anytime that you would want a person there. So they could be used as directional markers or as to mark caches or in hunting strategies. But this one in this case is set up as a beautiful photo opportunity, which is exactly what we ended up using it as. Behind my kid there, you can see the open waters of Hudson Bay. So they came up early in the bear season over Canadian Thanksgiving, which is traditionally the start of bear season for our Nat Hab trips. It's cool, it's crisp, but it's not yet very, very cold. And you can see that the open water is still there. There was actually no ice that had formed at that point on the bay. Our next slide, as it comes up, you're going to start to use your spotting eyes the same way you would on one of our bear trips with Nat Hab. There are 2 bears in this photo, and these are the first 2 bears that my family saw when they came up on a visit. And I won't ask for your hands up to see if you see them, but hopefully you can. If you see two white blobs in the middle of the photo, that is what we started getting pretty excited about, because those were two bears in the distance. And to give you an idea what it looked like a little bit closer up, here we have my husband and sister-in-law, and out the front window there, you can see that there is a mom and a koi, or what we call a cub of the year, so a less than 12-month-old cub, standing on the shores of Hudson Bay. So a few things about this photo. Firstly, the way we were in a private vehicle like that was pretty typical of how this bear season ran. Because a lot of people came up in smaller family groups, a lot of the bear viewing that happened in this past year was done from private vehicles or in smaller viewing groups than what we would have typically seen in other years. The other more interesting thing is about the bears themselves. So like I said, this is a mom and cub right along the shores of Hudson Bay. And Judy just finished telling you how mums and cubs usually don't like to hang out along the shoreline, because this is the territory of the males while they wait for freeze up. And this particular mom and cub were present for a couple of weeks at the beginning of the season. And this poor mother, she must have been absolutely exhausted. She only had the one cub. And in the times that I saw her, she was consistently trying to grab a cat nap while this cub was exploring off in the distance, trying to approach cars, trying to climb over rocks, trying to roll around in the kelp. And she occasionally would wake up in a panic and try to find where this cub had gone. And obviously eventually decided that this was too stressful an environment, and she actually took this cub and left the shore area. And as far as we know, maintained her space away from the shoreline until ice had come in. So quite the cub, this guy. Churchill is, of course, well known for its bears, but that's not the only reason that we like to visit Churchill in the fall. I wanted to make sure that my family, when they came up, had an experience just as good as any of the Nat Hab trips that came up. And to me, that means getting a chance to introduce them to some local culture and some other local operators as well. So the left-hand side there, those of you who have been to Churchill might recognize the site. This is the dog yard of Wapusk Dog Adventures. Dave Daly is the gentleman standing in the middle of the shot there, and my son is in front being jumped on by a dog. So Dave is one of our local service providers. He is a dog musher, and he has one of the few large kennels around Churchill. We use him for a lot of our dog sled rides when we bring guests to town. It's an important part of Northern culture, and Dave does just a hands down amazing job at managing the dogs, managing the yard, and keeping everybody just so incredibly happy, dogs and people alike. At the time of year when my family came up, he was doing dog sled rides on wheeled carts, so that's how they went around. And my son came home at the end of the day and said, "Well, I know what I want to be when I grow up." Like, "Oh yeah, okay, what is that?" Like, "A dog musher." I went, "Great, that's, maybe we'll put you on apprentice cleanup duty for a couple of years and see if that still sticks around." But he had such a great time getting to meet all the dogs and going for a ride. And on the right-hand side there, I just threw up for comparison's sake what it looks like in the winter. So this is a couple of Nat Hab guests with a musher, also at Dave's dog yard. And what I like seeing most about these shots like this are just all the happy faces. The musher is happy, the guests are happy, and look at those smiling dogs. The only sad dogs at a dog yard when you go for a ride are the ones who don't get picked to pull that day. Those are the unhappy faces. So I was very glad that they had a chance to do that. And the other really important part that I wanted them to experience when they were up is going out on one of those big tundra machines like the polar rovers. So that's typically how we view polar bears when we go out with natural habitats. And I said before that this year, because people were coming up in smaller family groups, that a lot of the bear viewing was happening by small personal vehicles. And that's true, but there were also still, the polar rovers were still out in the wildlife management area, taking guests out to see bears in their natural habitat. And this picture here, I love it especially because you can't, to me, it doesn't even look any different than how we normally view polar bears. We have a group of people who have, in this case, they happen to be wearing masks. They are very well spaced out. This was taken in October of 2020. And then our next slide, you'll see a polar rover in October of 2019. The take home from me as I brought my own family up and took part in these typical activities that we do in bear season was a general feeling of overall safety. It made me feel like what we do normally with natural habitat is already taking care of so many of the very important things like spacing, like providing adequate distance, and we still have this amazing opportunity to view bears and see that other Arctic wildlife in that safe manner. I'm happy to report, as Judy mentioned, that all of the operators are going above and beyond to ensure guest safety, and it's that the happy news is that it worked. Throughout the entirety of the summer 2020 and the fall season of 2020, there were absolutely no cases of COVID in Churchill, no cases of people bringing anything in. And it was extremely nice to hear, as somebody who works in tourism and who brought their own family up, is that what we did worked, and it worked well, and it still felt like a fantastic trip. I was so happy to have the opportunity to bring the family up and for them to see where I work and to get to see polar bears for the first time. So I'm not going to stop right there because there's still some more fun things to talk about for polar bears. Judy did such a great job of talking about research that happened over the summer. And throughout the world, 2020 for researchers is for a lot of people going to be an empty space in their spreadsheets and a hole in their multi-year data sets. And while some of the research was able to be done by volunteers like Judy and by researchers who were able to get up, unfortunately, polar bear research around the world very much took a hit. And that was also the case for the Western Hudson Bay population of bears. The Western Hudson Bay bear population is normally the most studied bear population in the world. And what it means for us that we've lost a lot of information this year is it's actually too early to tell. 2020 will be an empty mark in a lot of those data sheets for bear research. But what we can look at, and what I know that researchers around the world are looking at, are some of those proxy markers that we can talk about. And this image here that we're looking at is, I think, one of the most interesting proxy markers that we were able to pick up on this year. And what we see here is a mom and triplets. This just blew everybody's mind when this happened. This mom and triplets were in the wildlife management area just outside Churchill for a couple of days in November. I have personally never seen a mom and triplets. I know Judy has never seen a mom and triplets, and we know that mums and triplets have not been seen in the Western Hudson Bay population since 1996. So what does it mean that all of a sudden we have a mom and triplets? On a larger side, we don't know, because it's one mom and one set of triplets. So we can't necessarily extrapolate to the whole population, but we can start to look at some of those indicators and hopefully make some judgment calls as to what it might have meant. So this mom, take a look at her. She looks fantastic. She is raising and nursing 3 cubs, and she still has that beautifully rounded rump to her, which shows us that she still has adequate fat deposits. Now, what we do know is that the number of offspring that females have directly correlates with their condition when they go into their maternity den. So if you have a really, really fat mama bear, she is able to have triplets or twins. And if you have a mom who is in less good condition, you might get a singleton or you might get twins. And if it's a mom in really, really bad condition, she may not take a pregnancy to term at all. So we know by the fact that she has triplets that she must have been in phenomenal condition when she went into her den in the fall. We don't know if that's true for other bears, but what we did see throughout the course of bear season 2020 was that bears were overall pretty darn fat. I think I made numerous comments to both my family and Judy and everybody else I talked to, because every bear I saw in 2020, I went, huh, that's a really fat bear. And I'd see another one and go, oh, that bear is even fatter. And I had never seen so many bears in such good shape as I did this year. We don't know exactly why this might be the case, but we can start to make some guesses based on data that we do have. So normally in the Western Hudson Bay population, there are a number of collars put on bears so that we can track where they go during the course of the year. Very few of those went out in 2020. Only the bears that were handled by the Polar Bear Alert Program got new collars, but there were collars that remained on from 2019. And I have two maps up on the slides right now. The left-hand map is from July 31st of 2020. And you can see that those little dots represent where those collars were on July 1st of last year. And looking at this, I can see that there's some on land, but a lot of them look like they're out there on the water. Those bears actually aren't on water. That's telling us that there was still an ice shelf at the end of July last year. And on the right-hand side is the same collars 2 weeks later on August 14th, and you can see that there is still a bear out on land, out on the water just north of Churchill. And in fact, the last collared bear in 2020 didn't arrive on land until August 22nd. Now, think about where you live and when your ice leaves. It took until August 22nd for the ice to sufficiently melt that there was no habitat left for those polar bears on Hudson Bay. We also know that freeze up in 2020 happened in mid-November. So those bears last year try doing it yourself, that they only had a 3-month fast relative to what we've seen in other previous years. That's a lot shorter than what we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years for an ice-free fasting period. So the fact that we anecdotally saw a lot of fat bears is supported by the data that we do have. And just to show you kind of what's happening right now with some of these collared bears, this is an enhanced image here. This is a collared bear, a female collared bear, who is leaving her maternity den. So this particular bear was in a den in Wapusk, or just south of Churchill, at the end of February, and has left her den and is now walking with a new cub, heading to the ice. So we have very few of these collars out right now to tell us what conditions are like for those mums and cubs. But I love kind of bringing it full circle and seeing that bears are still off doing bear things, even if we're not there watching them. And to bring it back to the end of February and into March, at the end of February is when us in Churchill, we always start to put our bear eyes back on when we're working outside. And indeed, that last week in February is when we started seeing bear tracks reappearing. So on the left-hand side, those are the first bear signs of 2021. And then just last week, one of my staff members saw her first bear, and in fact, a cub as well. So that's on the right-hand side there. Unfortunately, it's just an impromptu cell phone shot, but in the center of that image, you can see that that's a mom. And off to the left of her, just behind her, is a new cub. So that would be a cub of this year, probably only about 20 to 25 pounds, making their way out onto the ice to go hunt some beautiful ring seals. So Churchill's still here. The bears are still here. The belugas are on their way. And I'm so happy to bring you news from Churchill and also give you the message that the bears are doing okay, and that we just can't wait to bring everybody back up and get the green light for travel again. It's gonna be a great 2021 when we're all back together and able to see these great animals again. So thanks very much for attending, and I'm going to pass things back to Kendall here.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. We've got some great questions for you, and we'll take questions for the next, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. For those watching, if you have a question for our panel today, you can submit those in your control panel under the questions field. Okay, there were a few people who were curious. You know, you've talked a lot about how the wildlife was doing, but because tourism seems to be such a huge part of Churchill's economy, they just wanted to know how the local Churchill residents were faring.
Shall I take this one, Judy?
Yeah, you were there most recently.
All right, thanks. So I think, I mean, there's always individual variability, but like everywhere else, Churchill has been a lot, you know, more put apart from the rest of the world than it ever has been. So it's welcomed fewer visitors. People have had a harder time traveling out to visit with friends or family, but that's more or less the way it's been everywhere else in the world. As far as the businesses go, we've been very, very lucky in Canada to have received a lot of support from our various levels of government. So every business that existed in Churchill and every tour operator is still there, ready to ramp up and deliver programs as soon as we're able to.
Great. Okay, we've got a few questions about belugas and trips to see belugas, so I'll hit those first. When's the best time frame to see both the wildflowers and belugas on the same trip?
Ooh, Judy, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, Eleanor, you'll jump in because you're the plant expert actually. But the beluga season is July and August. So once the ice is gone from the bay, the belugas know, and they're there immediately. And I've actually had the great fortune to be up at Cape Churchill, so Cape Mary, right where you can look out to the bay, and then the river, the Churchill Estuary, and the river is just right there. I've had the great fortune to be standing there as the first beluga is visible, and there's all these locals up there, and you would think that it was more of a tourist thing, but all the locals are there and they're cheering and crying, and it was really cool. In terms of the
I cheered up myself many times.
Yeah. You know, and I'll maybe let Eleanor jump in on the wildflowers, but they're so varied. There's a real season there that she can.
Sure, and I had to learn the hard way here too, that when I'm talking with my botanist hat on, my botanist hat says the best time to see wildflowers is early in July, because that's when you get the greatest variability of flowers. More species are out to look at. But if what you want to see is that that fireweed that carpets the landscape, and you want to see a polar bear perhaps, or other animals in the fireweed, and you just want to look out and see that sea of purple, that is getting towards the end of July and through August at that point. So by that time, by the time the fireweed is out, pretty well all the other flowers are done.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of kayaking, how smooth is the water?
I could maybe take this one. I'm also a kayak instructor, so I'm always amazed that people don't tip, and they don't. The kayaks that are used by our partners up in Churchill are really stable recreational style kayaks, so they are not tippy. I've had my 85-year-old mother out in a kayak with me, and my two sisters and my one sister, she's a larger gal, and she just said, I'm not doing this. And we got her in there, and she was just taken off. So they're very stable, and the water can get a little bit choppy, but if the water is too choppy to be paddling, then they bring you in. And there's always Zodiacs out for support when you're kayaking. Doesn't matter, like Nat Hab groups, everyone. That's their regulation with our partner there, is they will have they'll have the Zodiac support, and sometimes there could be as many as 3 Zodiacs out just circulating around, making sure everybody's fine. But yeah, the Zodiacs are stable, and the water is some days it can be just like glass, like that picture that I put up. It was pretty calm. Some days it's a little bit choppier, and then you just adjust where you go.
Mhm. And so someone was wondering how belugas are able to go from saltwater to freshwater when they go into rivers.
Very little to it in that they, so as we know, the beluga whales are present through Hudson Bay and into the Hudson Straits. And the salt water that is there is normal sea salt water. As they move into the estuary, they come into what's called that brackish water. So it's a mixture of both seawater and fresh water. And they only truly very rarely get into what I would call genuinely fresh water. There have been some documented cases even just a couple of years ago, most recently of a beluga whale swimming something like close to 30 miles upstream and getting into a freshwater lake. But overall, they tend to stay in that brackish area or in the salt water.
All right. And so we've got a couple questions about polar bears, so we'll end on those. When's the best time to see polar bears in Churchill? And someone's wondering if October's too early, and I have to say from personal experience, I was there in October and I saw lots of bears. So
Yeah, no, it's not too early at all. Nat Hab invests a lot of time and energy into planning out the dates for polar bear trips, and you know, it's Mother Nature first of all, so you have to realize that. But I mean, we're seeing bears in the summer, so October, November dates that we have are excellent viewing times for the bears, and you know, it's luck of the draw as to how close those bears actually get to you. And every experience that we have out on the tundra is just an amazing, really, truly an amazing experience. Eleanor, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but.
Oh, that sounds good to me. I like your answer.
So someone is wondering if they visit in the summer to see belugas, what's the chance of seeing a polar bear?
That's a great question, and it comes down to Mother Nature as well. Last year we saw that there was still ice present into mid-August, and the longer that ice lasts on Hudson Bay, the fewer bears we're going to see on land, because they will preferentially be on ice instead of coming to land. I would say over the course of my summer spent in Churchill that I've never seen bears in early July. And then as we get into mid-July and onwards, I would give it about a 50-50 chance. What do you think, Judy?
Yeah, and it's about you got to be out looking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you take the opportunities. So when we're out on a trip with Nat Hab and we say, hey, who wants to go for a drive in the summer? Because we do have a little bit more flexibility to do that kind of thing. And you say, oh, I'd rather sleep. That's great, sleep. But if you're not out cruising around, you don't tend to see bears unless, of course, there's one ripping through town, and that's when we don't really want you out seeing that bear. So take the drive.
Yep, it's true of any wildlife viewing. Hey, is the more you look, the more you see.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, final question today. Can one see the northern lights during polar bear season?
We can both
jump in
on that. Yeah, the short answer is yes.
Short answer is yes. Although during polar bear season, because we are getting ice formation happening on Hudson Bay, that causes a large release of heat energy into the atmosphere. And what that ends up meaning is that there's this overhanging cloud layer that tends to sit right over Hudson Bay and just over the land to Churchill as well. So on those nights where we have big open skies, chances of lights, pretty good, but it's whether or not we can get those open sky nights. I think the last time we had guests up in Churchill in 2019, I don't think I had a single night of northern lights, but then the year before that I had a lot. So it's extremely variable.
We just know that they're there. And if we're checking as guides, we're checking the data, we're always checking for northern lights. and we'll figure out who wants to get up, who wants to be awakened, and who wants to stay asleep. Because not everybody wants to get up at 10:30 or 11 at night to go see the lights, but it's exciting when we go.
It is.
Yep. All right. Well, for those of you watching, if you have further questions about our trips, you can visit our website or give us a call at the number you see on the screen, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. All right, Judy and Eleanor, thank you so much for taking the time to present today. This was absolutely wonderful. I'd love to have you guys back if you're ever interested. Excuse me. I'm going to hand it back over to you for closing comments, and we'll start with Judy.
Well, thank you so much, Kendall. Thanks for managing everything here for us, and thank you to Nat Hab for these amazing opportunities to reach out to people and just to experience nature and to experience it with you people who are watching. And we just are very fortunate to have these wild places and to have a company like Nat Hab that is so respectful of these places. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Judy, and I'll exactly echo Judy's comments and say that I think a lot of what brings us as expedition leaders joy is not just finding those wild spaces and those wild animals, but it's in the showing and the sharing of that with somebody else. And I think we're all just extremely excited for the opportunity when it comes back to get back out there and move from the virtual sphere back into the land.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Judy and Eleanor. And my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in today. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation and we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Bye, everybody.